Hello, everyone, and welcome to Spiritism, a closer look. This is our program number 3, and our current topic is Spiritism from France to the USA. So on the first 2 programs, we were able to explain a little bit how Spiritism, or at least the referring point to Spiritism, starts actually here, right here in America, and it gets moved to Europe and then to France. And today we're going to speak a little bit about how Spiritism develops in France. So welcome to our program. I'm Luis Lima, right here from Central Florida. And as always remember, every week we do a trivia, so we can always go to weekly.spirittrivia.com and cast your answer. We put a new question or a new trivia at the end of every program. So, and the program after that one, we discussed the trivia for the previous program. So let's bring the trivia for last week. Let's see what the answers are, what the possibilities are in the answers. So here's the question. Which of the following events in history were pivotal for the upbringing of Spiritism? Okay, so we have 4 possibilities here. Number 1, printed press, paganism, and Christianity. Well, paganism has no relation whatsoever to Spiritism. Christianity, of course, it does. Printed press, it doesn't make Spiritism happen. It's not an important thing. It's important in general for humanity, but not specifically for Spiritism. Second option, Age of Enlightenment, Industrial Revolution, and Christianity. So again, Christianity, of course, Spiritism is all about Christ, Jesus Christ. Age of Enlightenment, we commented on that last week. That's it occurs around 1750, 1760, and that's when philosophy is brought back into our minds, because it had been, it had been off our minds for 1600 years. So yes, it's an important thing. Spiritism is about philosophy. It is a philosophy, essentially. And Industrial Revolution, yes, Industrial Revolution. With the Industrial Revolution, creation of new machines and things, new methods of doing things are brought to life. And the methodology used in science, which starts right there in the Industrial Revolution, at least the way we know it, that same methodology is used by Allan Kardec to compose his entire works. So yes, that would be the right answer. Age of Enlightenment, Industrial Revolution, and Christianity. So we have 2 more here. Let's just go through them. Philosophy, religion, and science. Those are not events, so that cannot be the answer. Those are just things that happen in Spiritism, but they are not events. And the last option, the raps at the Fox Sisters' house. Which, yeah, it's okay. It's one of them. The creation of the School of Magnetism, no, it's not related to Spiritism. Spiritism came about, even if that hasn't happened. And the European migration movement, no, that's totally off. So here we go. Age of Enlightenment, Industrial Revolution, and Christianity. So let's continue with the development of this whole thing. Let's roll out the next chapter on this Spiritism from France to the USA. Last week we stopped in 1857 when Spiritism starts as a bookish philosophy, and with the publication of the first book, the Spirit's Book. Well, today we're going to see what happens during the lifetime of Allan Kardec, as Allan Kardec, not his whole lifetime, not as Professor Rivail, which was his original French name. So in 1857, the Spirit's Book is published. If we open up the Spirit's Book, we see there are 4 parts. Allan Kardec divides in 4 parts. And you see here on the screen, part 1, First Causes, part 2, Spirit World, part 3, Moral Laws, and part 4, Hopes and Consolations. But there's also an introduction. And here's a key point. He is going to write about something that has no relation to anything existent. It's a new philosophy. It's a brand new concept on a lot of things, especially concepts that will go frontally against those brought in by the church throughout since the 300s, basically late 200s, I would say. So he has to explain to the reader what the reader is going to read about. So because it's such a new thing, the introduction to the Spirit's book is a long thing. You can't do this in 2-3 pages. So it is almost like a book or a booklet, let's put it this way, inside the Spirit's book. So we can consider the Spirit's book of having 5 parts instead of just the 4 traditional part 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we are going to consider that Spirit's book had 5 parts. Okay, with time, so that again, that was a first publication, 1857. With time, Allan Kardec is going to write a lot more. And again, we got to understand this. It's not that he's going to write because he's like, oh, I'm going to retire. I don't have anything to do. Let me start writing a lot of things. No. That's not what happened. It's totally different. He was being guided. He was chosen. He was chosen to be able to do this thing. And we're going to, hopefully, throughout the explanation today, we're going to be able to demonstrate why he was picked up, let's just say. So out of these 5 parts of the Spirit books, he's going to go at length in each one of them. And each one of them is going to become a different book. So from the introduction of the Spirit's book, a new book is created. It's called What is Spiritism? 2 years later, 2.5 years later. That's in August of 1859. And the story behind this book is very interesting. When he wrote the Spirit's book, when he published the Spirit's book and he was out there, he was getting letters. And in those days, we're talking about letters, mail letters, handwritten mail letters, okay, that would come to his house. And some people were just complaining that they didn't understand. Some other people were praising him for the job. Some other people were frontally against and, telling him a lot of things, a lot of bad things. Some people had just questions. I'm not sure about this. I'm not sure about that. In the beginning, he was answering to every single letter, every single one of them, by hand. You see, there's no copy and paste. There's nothing like this, no computer. So he was doing this by hand. But the number of letters became too many per day. So there was a point where he couldn't do that anymore. So what he did is he created, let's say, piles of letters belonging to the same subject. And instead of answering one by one, he published the book, What is Spiritism, that would address all the questions that he had right in front of his desk. And he couldn't do one by one anymore. That's how the What is Spiritism book is born and published in 1859. And it's not a book dictated by spirits. It's him, the man, Allan Kardec, incarnated the man, writing and responding to all the questions that he had received. It's an interesting book. It has 2 parts. The first part is about some dialogues that he had collected throughout his experiences. And the second part addresses Spiritism in general, what it is, who we are, where we're going to, and all of that kind of thing. And another important thing in this book is he explains not only what is Spiritism, but he explains what is not Spiritism. Very clever, very interesting book. So that was, this book came out, it was developed from the introduction of the Spirit's book. In 1861, so that's almost 4 years, about 4 years after the first initial publication of the Spirit's book. From part 2 of the Spirit's book, he publishes the Medium's book. The Medium's book contains the methodology that we just talked about on the question from Spirit Trivia last week. It contains the methodology for studying anything. That's what science uses. That's what the technical aspects of studying are based on. So there's a methodology, there's a method of doing things. And because the medium's book is going to talk about an experimental science, it has to follow some protocol, some methods. And those methods are fully 100% in line with the ones he used. So that was the medium's book, 1861, came out of part 2 in the Spirit's book. From part 3 of the Spirit's book, part 3, Moral Laws, a whole new book is developed. In 1864, he publishes The Gospel According to Spiritism. It's an interesting thing because, you see, we discussed this already last week. When he starts collecting information from these mediumistic meetings he was going to in 1855-56 until he published the Spirit's book, he never stopped going to these weekly mediumistic meetings, putting his questions out, getting the answers, compiling information. He never stopped this. So there was a point in the Spirit's book where that's question 625 in the second edition, he asks the spirits, is there anyone that we can use as a role model? Is there any spirit that ever set foot on earth that we can follow? We should look as a model. And the answer is a straight shot. Yeah, look at Jesus. So think about yourself. If you were Allan Kardec and you received this answer, what are you going to do? You have to read and you have to know everything about Jesus. Absolutely everything. What he did, what he did not do and why, what he was saying and what he was saying not to and why. Everything. We need to know everything about it. And where in 1864 or in the early 1860s, where are you going to find information about Jesus? Not Google, not internet, nothing like this. There's only one source, and that one source is called the Bible. So Allan Kardec goes to the Bible, New Testament, and starts digging in heavily. He was deeply studying this. And at the same time, he was going through these weekly meetings. And he was bringing some of the questions he had after reading some of the chapters in the Bible to the meetings. So he was asking the spirits for clarification on certain passages and certain things. And the spirits were responding to him. And that's why today, if you open the Gospel for Spiritism, at the end of each chapter, you have something or a part called Instructions of the Spirits. The spirits were responding to these questions, and he publishes in its entirety. Very interesting, right? So this book, Gospel According to Spiritism, touches the moral laws, everything that Jesus came to show, to tell, and how things are done and should be done. From part 4 of the Spirit's book in 1865, 1 year after the Gospel, he publishes another book. And this book goes really frontally against the thoughts of the church. And the book name is Heaven and Hell, where he brings, or the spirits, right, bring to him clarification about what is heaven, how we should see heaven, same for hell, same for God, same for punishment, same for suffering. So all these things, all these concepts, especially justice, divine justice, which is not really well understood, and it wasn't at the time, it still isn't. A lot of us still have a very hard time understanding and dealing with divine justice. But he brings all of that in a book divided also in 2 parts. The first part is a complete transcription of some of the mediumistic meetings he was going to, and all the dialogues they were having with the suffering spirits. Not all suffering spirits. Some of them were good spirits. Some came to give us new information. So he organized the dialogues by subject, by actually type of spirit that was showing up at the meetings. The second part talks about the Spiritist philosophy, for heaven, for hell, all of those things that I mentioned, punishment, suffering, okay, 1865. So that came out of part 4 in the Spirit's book. And finally, from part 1 in the Spirit's book, he develops a lot more, and he publishes in 1868 Genesis, Predictions and Premonitions According to Spiritism, where he's going to mainly talk about the creation on the first part of the book. So he goes heavily on fluids, which I don't know if you feel the same way, but by going through Spiritist centers and putting seminars and lectures, we get a lot of questions about fluids. It seems to be something that people have a hard time understanding. So we are, I think a lot has to do with vocabulary. But anyway, that's not for today. But he has an entire chapter published in this book, Genesis, about fluids. So those are we call them the basic books of the Spiritist Codification. So right here, we're going to put them in chronological order for you right here on the screen. But that was not all Allan Kardec wrote. He did so many more things. Here's one of them. After the publication in April of 57 of the Spirit's book, less than a year later, he starts something new, a new project. It's called Spiritist Review. The Spiritist Review, which let's bring the idea to the current times. Let's say, for example, that you have a magazine. Let's just say Time magazine, which is very famous around the world. So Time magazine. What's the purpose of a magazine like that? It's to bring you faster updates that you would have if they decided to write a book every 6 months or maybe every 1 year or so. If Time magazine decides to convert itself to a book published on, let's just say, December 31st of every year, on December 31st, you're going to read things that happened in January, almost 12 months prior to that. You're not even going to remember anymore. So it's hard to keep things updated. That's why he decided to publish a new thing called Spiritist Review. It's a monthly publication, 12 issues per year, and he did it for 12 years until his physical death. Not only that, he never failed, never ever failed. So it goes from January of 58 through April of 1869. This was directed and published by him. Okay, so that was 1858. And I'll tell you, the man doesn't stop. He doesn't stop. In April of 1858, he created what came to be known as the first Spiritist Center. It could be considered the first Spiritist Center in the world, founded by himself, Allan Kardec, the Spiritist Society of Paris. And you see, like any Spiritist Center here or anywhere in the world, when you open up an entity, a legal entity, you have obligations, you have administration to be done, you have taxes to be paid or at least reported, something like that. So you have to have some sort of administration. That administration falls under the hands of what we usually call a president. So he was obviously given the title of president by those who founded with him. And he said, no, I don't want the title. I don't want to be the president. I'm not the president. The president is actually St. Louis. But St. Louis is discarnated because he himself, Allan Kardec, considered St. Louis to be the president of the Spiritist Center. And it couldn't be that way, of course. So they all considered then St. Louis to be the spiritual president. The purpose of the foundation of that society was to study the Spiritist science. You see, people were going to see manifestations and tables flying, and they would make it to the door, and people would explain, that's not what we are here for. We don't do that here. We study Spiritism. We study the message that was brought to us by the spirits. So Anyway, time goes by. In 1858, he publishes a little book, a small book called Practical Instructions about Spirit Manifestations. This is 1858. It's a guide for mediums. We could consider roughly this to be like a first edition, I would say, or a preview to what became later, 3 years later, the mediums book. So it's a guide for about communication between spirits, and all that is going to be in more details in the mediums book. I'm sorry. It starts right here in 1858. And time goes by, and he publishes in 1860 the second edition of the Spirits book. The first edition in 1857 had 501 questions. And again, he never stopped going to the Spiritist meetings, so he was getting more answers to the questions he had. So by then, 3 years later, he revised and expanded the first edition, making a second edition with 1,019 questions, more than double than we had before. And that's the edition that we have in our shelves today. That's what most of us are using today. Okay. 1861, something really sad happens. Allan Kardec is asked to compile boxes of books to be sent to Spain for the growing Spiritist centers to be able to have access to information and read and study. So he puts together a few boxes and sends to Spain. The problem is, in Spain, that was exactly where the Inquisition had its, it was the worst of it. The Inquisitions was the Spanish Inquisition. And anything that came into the country, like today, for example, anything that comes into the country has to go through customs. You have to clear through customs. In Spain, in those days, that was not done by the government. It was done by the church. So the church gets the box, opens up, sees a lot of Spiritist books by Allan Kardec. So what they do is they decide to burn all those books. In Spanish, that movement is called auto de fe. That's the term in Spanish. And what this is the intention of an auto de fe is to make it public. First of all, it was a public thing. It was in an open place in Barcelona, one of the squares in Barcelona. So the public was brought in to make sure that they saw the books being burned. So it had to do, auto de fe has to do with humiliation, something like this. Punishment and humiliation. And then what you see here on the screen is the list of books that were sent at the time. Now, very interesting is what happens in Spain after this 9th day of October, 1861. People heard about it. Some people were physically on the square to see it happening, but word gets out there. So everybody now is hearing about this auto de fe. Who is this Allan Kardec? Who is this? So it developed from the public point of view a tremendous interest in his works. So now we want to know who Allan Kardec is. So it had the opposite effect that the church thought it was. They thought they were going to accomplish something. They didn't. They made it easier for Spiritism to get through customs. And what did Allan Kardec do? He wrote, right after that, a tiny, tiny book. Let me show you here. This is the book. It's a tiny, tiny book. It's a pocket book, 30-some pages, called Spiritism in its Simplest Expression, which is the bare minimum that you can that you should have about Spiritism to understand what it is and not lose anything. Of course, it's not as detailed as a full book, 500 pages, but you see, this is the bare minimum. This is actually recommended for those who are getting to know Spiritism. They are interested in, they heard about it. This is a great book, easy to read, very short. You read this in a couple hours. And with that book, again, look at the size of the book. You could put this thing in the pockets of your suit, your tunic, and just go through customs. You wouldn't get caught. And that way, these books starting to make its way into Spain, totally against the will of the church and the Spanish Inquisition. In 1862, after doing a lot of trips throughout France, because he was going from city to city, disseminating Spiritism, meeting with people, founding new Spiritist centers. He was very active in all senses that we can think of. So in 1862, he publishes a book with his impression about the Spiritist movement. One interesting thing about this book is, let's just say you go into a Spiritist center today. At the end of the, say, public lecture, whoever is in charge of the meeting comes back to the audience and says, listen, next week we're going to have a speaker. And usually that's something we do all the time, right? We announce the speaker for the next public meeting. Can you imagine if you were sitting there and whoever is coordinating comes out and say, the next week we are going to have speaker Allan Kardec. Wow, that would blow our minds. Well, we kind of don't have to wait for that, right? Because his speeches are published in this book, Spiritist Voyage in 1862. He has his personal, the transcripts of his speeches published in there. So we know exactly what he was saying to the Spiritist movement, what he was saying about when founding a new Spiritist center, and so forth. And this is the last, not the last, but this is a book. It's not really a book, it's more like a pamphlet. In March of 1869, that was 2 weeks before, it was published 2 weeks before his death. And it's called Catalogue Raisonné. It's, I would say, reasonable catalog, something like that. What this is very interesting. It's a list of 200 suggested books that anybody who wanted to have a Spiritist library should have, either in the Spiritist Center or at home. If you wanted to get serious about Spiritist at the time, this is 1869, right? You should have these 200 books. And the way he presents the list of 200 books is divided by subject. So codification books, and the 5 books, and philosophy books, and a lot of books. And the last portion is books against Spiritism. Wow. Is he recommending us to read books against Spiritism? Oh, yeah, he was. He still is, right? You see, this is the logic behind it. If we are going to bring people into Spiritism, if we are going to try to help them, we need to know what they think of us and what they think in general about life, their philosophy of life, their religion, if there's any, their belief system. We need to know about it. If we don't know, we cannot help them. Not only that, if they are telling or putting us against the wall on certain questions, if I don't know how to respond to that, I better stop and seek for an answer and learn. Let's see what Spiritism says about this. So the materialist point of view or paradigm, they do a lot of this to us. They keep asking about God and God and God, and so at one point, if we don't know how to handle it, we're going to be put against the wall and we have no answer. So that kind of information in these books is very valuable for us. Very valuable. They will make us seek the answer for those things that we don't know yet, and we need to know. So we have all these books. One interesting passage in 1861, right, when he writes the Medium's book, he is responding to people asking him about something like this. We have, by then, 1861, we have a lot of books. We have the Spiritist Review coming out every month. So we have a lot to read. And people are asking, what is the best order that we should read this? He publishes the answer. So first go to what is Spiritism, then a lot deeper with the Spirit's book, then the Manifestations with the Medium's book, and the Current Facts and Teachings with the Spiritist Review. Very interesting. Look at his thing. So for him, the Spiritist Review has a very special value. Usually, we don't put all the emphasis on it. But again, I've already mentioned that 12 volumes, 12 issues per year. Total of 136 issues, not 144, because during the 12th year, he died. So the 12th year goes until April of 1861. He died in March of 1869. He died in March of 1869, but by then, he died on the 31st. By then, the issue for April had already been written by him. So the April edition is still under him, written by him. And like he says, it's a collection of facts, theoretical explanations, and isolate sections. And he considers this is written in several points of his work. For him, the Spiritist Review is part of the Spiritist Codification. So if we don't read any of those reviews, we are not reading the codification in its entirety. After his death, what we did to make it simpler is, for every year, we collected the 12 issues for the year, we put everything together in one book, so it became, the 12 issues become now a book, physically speaking, and that would be the Spiritist Review 1858, for example. Same for the year 1859, 1860, 61. That's why we have 12 volumes, one volume for every year. It's a great tool. Now, I want you to think here with me before we can close. What you see here are all the main books that we discussed. Right? Spiritism in its simplest expression, what is Spiritism, and the 5 books of the codifications. If we were to look at the number of pages in each of these books, right? The simplest expression is very thin. It's like 30, 35 pages. What is Spiritism is a relatively short, because it's a very objective book, 220 pages. All the others are in the neighborhood of 550 pages. So, you know, they're sizable. They are sizable. Now, do you know how many pages he wrote on the Spiritist Review? 4,600. The Spiritist Review by itself has more pages than anything else he wrote. And we don't pay attention to the Spiritist Review. Not only that, he is telling us that this is part of the basic teachings in Spiritism. So we need to pay attention to this. We need to put emphasis on the Spiritist Review. Of course, it's a lot to read, but the works of Allan Kardec is such a beautiful thing, such a beautiful thing. It's it gives me chills when I talk about it. Literally, it does. It's unbelievable the amount of time that he had to devote. You see, there's no computer, no copy and paste, nothing like this. So the amount of time he had to devote to be able to produce the work he was supposed to. And we discussed last week, his mission was revealed to him in 1856. So he took the mission and he went ahead and did everything that was expected from him. We thank him. All of us, we should. And we should, you know, just when we read the works of Allan Kardec, when we read the codification, you know, we need to make sure that this is serious work. That's not somebody that was, oh, I'm in my 50s, I'm going to retire, I don't have anything to do, I'm going to write some books. No, that's not what happened. Not even close. He was a serious man from his youth days. We know that from his biography. So he was a serious man. He was this one chosen because he qualified. He had what was needed from an incarnate spirit to be able to do what he did. So anyway, here we are at the end of another From France to the USA, Spiritism, a closer look. And once again, I invite you to visit us on Spirit Trivia, weekly.spirittrivia.com. You're going to find the question of the week. So participate with us, cast your answer. We once again, I always tell that we don't collect any information from you. No names, no IP addresses, no email addresses, no nothing like this. Okay, so feel free. Nothing. Nobody's collecting anything from you. And I appreciate you participating with us this evening. This was our program number 3. We will see you here next week. Spiritism, a closer look, and Kardec Radio. Thanks so much, and have a great day.